I watched the helicopter shrink to a tiny speck against the vast white emptiness, its rotor noise fading until all that remained was the howling wind. Beside me stood Maxwell Smith, clutching his duffel bag with gloved hands, his eyes wide as he took in the endless Antarctic landscape surrounding Whitmore Research Base. "Let's get inside," I said, turning toward the main entrance. "Storm's coming." Maxwell nodded and followed me, his boots crunching in the snow. The responsibility of another newcomer weighed on me as I punched in the entry code and pulled open the heavy door. 3 years at this station had taught me what happened to the unprepared. "Main living quarters are this way," I explained, leading him through the utilitarian hallway. The base hummed with the constant sound of heating systems fighting against the brutal cold outside. Kitchen and common areas are to the left, labs and communications to the right. Maxwell took everything in with quick, assessing glances. He looked exactly like his file photo, mid-20s, academic type with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that hadn't yet been weathered by the harsh conditions. "How many people are stationed here?" he asked, adjusting his bag on his shoulder. "5 now, counting you," I answered. "There's me, Addie who runs meteorology, Jimmy who handles communications, and Dr. Pierce who leads the research team." I led him down the residential corridor to a door marked with a small whiteboard. Someone had written Maxwell Smith in neat block letters. "This is you," I said, pushing the door open. "Home sweet home for the next 8 months." The room was small but functional. A bed, desk, storage locker, and a single window. Maxwell set his bag down and immediately walked to the window, looking out at the white expanse. "These are reinforced," I said, tapping the thick glass. "Triple paned and secured with these." I pointed to the heavy-duty locks on each side of the frame. "You'll want to check them. Every night. Twice." Maxwell turned to me, confusion clear on his face. "Check the locks? Is that for the storms?" "Among other things," I replied, pulling the chair from his desk and sitting down. "There are rules here, Maxwell. Rules that keep people alive." His eyebrows rose slightly. I wasn't briefed on any special protocols beyond standard emergency procedures. "You wouldn't have been," I said. "They're not in any manual." Maxwell sat on the edge of his bed facing me. The skepticism in his expression was familiar. I'd seen it on every new arrival. "I need to tell you about the 5 rules we follow here," I began, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. "They might sound strange at first, but everyone who stays here follows them, without exception." "Okay," he said slowly. "First rule, nobody goes outside alone. Not for any reason, not even for 5 minutes." Maxwell nodded. "Buddy system, standard Arctic protocol." "It's more than that," I said. 3 years ago, we had a researcher named Amber Warner, brilliant glaciologist, experienced in polar conditions. One morning, she told me she needed to check an instrument about 50 yards from the main entrance. Said she'd be back in 10 minutes. I paused, the memory still sharp. The sky was clear. No storms forecast. I was busy with maintenance reports, so I didn't go with her. That was my mistake. Maxwell watched me intently now, his initial confusion giving way to curiosity. When she didn't come back after 20 minutes, I went looking, found her footprints leading straight out from the door, then stopping abruptly about 30 yards out. No signs of struggle, no indication she'd fallen into anything, just gone. "What about search parties?" Maxwell asked. "We searched for 3 days, nothing. Not even her emergency beacon activated." I stood up and walked to his window. "So that's rule 1. Nobody goes outside alone. Ever." I reached for the locks on his window, demonstrating the proper way to secure them. "Rule 2. Check your window locks and door deadbolts. Twice, every night." My fingers moved through the familiar pattern. Top lock, side locks, bottom lock. Then repeat. During storms, sometimes there are figures outside the windows. They look like people. Sometimes people you know. Maxwell's expression shifted from attentive to concerned. "Figures, like hallucinations from snow blindness?" "I wish that's all they were," I said. "But they've been photographed, and they appear even when visibility should make it impossible to see anything." I finished with the window demonstration and turned back to him. "Rule 3. Never be the last person awake in the common areas. If you notice you're alone, turn off the lights and leave immediately." Maxwell adjusted his glasses. "Why? What happens?" "The darkness moves," I said simply, "not like shadows should. It moves independently, and it seems to gather. People who've stayed alone too long report hearing whispers coming from the corners where the darkness is deepest. I could see Maxwell processing this, trying to find rational explanations. That was good. A thinking mind was more likely to survive here. Rule 4, I continued. If you see a woman walking in the snow during a storm, do not look directly at her, do not speak to her, and do not, under any circumstances, follow her. Come find me immediately. A woman? Maxwell repeated. Is there another research station nearby? No, I said firmly. There isn't. And what walks out there isn't human, despite appearances. Has anyone ever? Yes, I cut him off. Lewis Hicks, environmental scientist. He saw her during his second month here, went out during a whiteout to rescue her. We found him 3 miles from base, half frozen, talking nonsense about her beautiful face and the voices in the ice. He was evacuated the next day, never regained his grip on reality. Maxwell swallowed hard, his skepticism visibly wavering. Last rule, I said. When the knocking starts at night, do not answer it, even if it sounds like someone you know calling your name. It's not them. Knocking? Maxwell asked, his voice quieter now. It usually starts around midnight. Sounds like someone tapping on your door or window. Sometimes it's just knocking. Sometimes it's voices that sound exactly like your colleagues, asking to be let in, saying they're freezing or injured. But if you check the other rooms, you'll find everyone safely in bed. I walked back to the chair and sat down again. The knocking can last until dawn. The best thing to do is put in earplugs and try to sleep through it. Maxwell was silent for a long moment, processing everything I'd told him. Finally, he spoke. With all due respect, Mr. Barr. Dalton, I corrected. Dalton, he continued. These phenomena you're describing, have you considered equipment malfunctions? Carbon monoxide leaks can cause hallucinations, and the psychological effects of isolation and darkness during polar winters are well documented. I nodded, having expected this response. The base has triple redundant CO monitors. As for isolation psychosis, it doesn't typically manifest as shared hallucinations among multiple observers. We've had different staff rotations over the years, and they all report the same phenomena. Maxwell ran a hand through his light brown hair. Maybe there are natural explanations. Wind patterns creating auditory illusions. Light refraction in ice crystals causing visual phenomena. I thought the same things when I first arrived, I said. I was a skeptic too. Looked for every rational explanation I could find. I stood up and moved toward the door. You'll have time to settle in and unpack. Dinner's at 6 in the common room. You'll meet the others then. Maxwell stood as well. I appreciate the orientation, but I know it's a lot to take in, I said. You don't have to believe me right now. Just follow the rules. The believing part will come on its own. I could see the doubt in his eyes, the same look I'd seen in Beverly Jenkins before she started hearing voices, in Jimmy Becker before he went catatonic, in Evelyn Pierce before she became obsessed with the woman in the snow. Maxwell would learn, just as they had, just as I had. One more thing, I added, pausing at the door. If you notice anyone starting to act strangely, talking about going outside alone, claiming they hear voices calling them, tell me immediately. Why? Maxwell asked. Because it means they're already being influenced, and once that starts, we don't have much time to help them. I left him standing in the middle of his new quarters, surrounded by locked windows and unanswered questions. The skepticism in his expression was familiar and expected. He was smart. His files showed a brilliant academic record and excellent psychological evaluations, but intelligence wasn't always enough to save people here. As I walked back toward my own quarters, I knew Maxwell Smith would either adapt to our reality or become another name on the growing list of evacuations. Either way, I'd done what I could to prepare him. The rest would depend on how quickly he learned that some rules exist because they've been written in blood. I heard Maxwell testing his window locks repeatedly that first night. The soft metallic clicks echoed down the hallway, stopping and starting again as he double-checked each latch. 3, maybe 4 times he went through the entire sequence. I'd done the same thing my first week, though I hadn't been quite so thorough. The sound was oddly comforting. At least he was taking the rules seriously. By morning, the storm I'd spotted on our arrival had hit full force. The walls of the station groaned under the assault of 100-mile-per-hour winds, a sound you never quite get used to but learn to sleep through anyway. I made my way to the common area early, finding only Addie already there. nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing weather data on her tablet. "Morning," she said without looking up. "New guy settling in?" "Seems to be following instructions," I replied, pouring myself coffee from the industrial pot that was always kept full. "Heard him checking his locks half the night." She nodded approvingly. "Better than the last one." We didn't talk about Beverly, who'd arrived 3 months ago to replace Jimmy after his evacuation. She'd been quiet at first, diligent about the rules. I wanted to believe Maxwell would stay that way. The next few days passed in the monotonous rhythm that defined life at Whitmore. I showed Maxwell around the facility, introduced him to the research protocols, and watched as he carefully observed the rules I'd laid out. He was cautious, but curious, a workable combination if he kept the caution dominant. 3 days after his arrival, I was eating breakfast in the cafeteria when Maxwell burst through the door. His face was flushed, eyes wide behind his glasses, hair disheveled like he'd run the entire way. He spotted me immediately and rushed over, nearly knocking over his chair as he sat down. "I need to talk to you," he whispered urgently, leaning across the table. His hands were shaking. I set down my fork. "What happened?" Maxwell glanced across the cafeteria where Addie sat alone, reviewing weather charts while eating her oatmeal. He lowered his voice even further. "I saw Addie outside my window just now, standing in the snow, staring in at me. I felt my stomach tighten." "You're sure it was Addie?" "Positive. Same face, same hair, same blue scarf she always wears." He swallowed hard. "But she's right there, eating breakfast." I looked over at Addie again, who was indeed wearing her trademark blue scarf, wrapped loosely around her neck as she ate. She hadn't left the cafeteria since I'd arrived 20 minutes earlier. "Did you speak to it? Try to open the window?" "No," Maxwell said, shaking his head vigorously. "I remembered the rules. I checked my locks, closed the blinds, and came straight here." I nodded, feeling a small surge of relief. "Good, that's exactly right." "What was it?" he asked, his voice steadier now but still urgent. "How can Addie be in 2 places at once?" "That's not Addie out there," I said quietly. "Whatever's outside just looks like her. It's happened before with other staff members." Maxwell stared at me, processing this information. The skepticism I'd seen in his eyes 3 days ago was fading, replaced by something closer to acceptance. "Louis Hicks," he said suddenly. "The guy who followed the woman in the snow. Before that happened, did he see duplicates of people?" I nodded. Started with seeing his bunkmate standing outside during a storm. 2 days later, he was chasing the snow woman into a blizzard. Maxwell fell silent, looking down at the table. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "The rules make more sense now." Over the following weeks, I watched Maxwell adapt to our reality. He became meticulous about checking locks, never lingered alone in common spaces, and kept his distance from windows during storms. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cautious vigilance that might keep him alive. On the 12th night after his arrival, the knocking started. I was awake in my quarters, reviewing research data, when the first taps echoed down the hallway. Soft at first, then more insistent. A pattern of 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. It came from the direction of Maxwell's room. I didn't move. The knocking would continue until dawn. It always did. Sometimes it moved from door to door, sometimes it stayed fixed on one target. Tonight, it had chosen Maxwell. The next morning, I found him in the lab, dark circles under his eyes but otherwise composed. He looked up when I entered. "It knocked all night," he said simply. "Just like you said it would." "Did you answer?" "No. Put in earplugs after the first hour. Still heard it, but it was muffled enough." I nodded approvingly. "It gets easier. After a while, you barely notice it." That wasn't entirely true. You never really stopped noticing it. But it was what he needed to hear. The alternative was paranoia, sleepless nights, and eventually the kind of breakdown that led to evacuation or worse. The real test came during the first major blizzard since Maxwell's arrival. 3 weeks in, a massive storm system descended on the base, reducing visibility to 0 and raising the wind howl to a constant scream. We were all confined indoors, running equipment checks and monitoring the structural integrity of the station. Maxwell was helping me secure additional bracing on the east corridor when he suddenly froze, his gaze fixed on the small reinforced window at the end of the hall. His body went rigid. "Maxwell?" I asked, following his line of sight. He immediately looked down at the floor, his movements deliberate and controlled. "She's out there," he said quietly. "The woman in the snow, just like you described." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. "Did you look at her face?" "No." I saw a figure in white and looked away immediately. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. I remembered Rule 4. "Good," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Let's finish up here and move to the interior section." Later that evening, after the others had gone to their quarters, Maxwell found me in the monitoring room. "I need to know," he said, sitting down across from me. "What happens to people who look at her face? Really happens, not just the official story." I considered him for a long moment. He'd followed the rules, shown good judgment. Maybe he deserved more than the sanitized version. "They become obsessed," I explained. "Start talking about how beautiful she is, how she's calling to them. They stop sleeping, stop eating. All they want is to go outside and find her again. And if they do go outside, they don't come back. Or if we manage to stop them, they're never the same. We evacuate them, but..." I trailed off, remembering the vacant look in Jimmy's eyes, the way Evelyn had clawed at the door until her fingers bled. Maxwell nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me the truth." While Maxwell was adapting well, I noticed concerning signs from Beverly Jenkins. She'd been with us for 3 months, working communications with no issues until recently. The first red flag came during a routine equipment check. I found her volunteering to inspect the exterior satellite array alone. "I can handle it," she insisted when I pointed out the first rule. "It's just 20 yards from the door." "That's what Amber said," I reminded her. "Nobody goes outside alone. I'll go with you." She reluctantly agreed, but I caught the flash of frustration in her eyes. Over the next few days, I made sure to partner with her for any exterior work, watching for other warning signs. They came quickly. During meals, I noticed her gaze drifting to the windows more frequently. During the blizzard, while Maxwell was avoiding the snow woman, Beverly was pressing her ear against the wall, listening intently. "Do you hear that?" she asked when she caught me watching her. "Hear what?" "The voices. During the storms, there are voices in the wind." I felt my chest tighten. "What are they saying?" She hesitated. "My name. They're calling my name." It was happening again. The same pattern I'd seen with Lewis, with Jimmy, with Evelyn. First came the fascination with the outside, then the voices, then the desperate need to answer them. "It's just the wind," I said, trying to sound casual. "The structure creates weird acoustics during storms." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. From that point on, I assigned myself as her constant partner, adjusting schedules to ensure she was never alone, especially during storms. I'd seen where this behavior led too many times to ignore the warning signs. Beverly's condition deteriorated rapidly. She became increasingly agitated, jumping at small noises and staring out windows whenever she thought no one was watching. During one particularly bad storm, I found her in the communications room with the exterior door partially unlocked. "I just needed some air," she claimed when I confronted her. "In a Category 5 blizzard?" I asked, securing the lock again. "It's not as bad as it looks," she insisted, though the wind was howling loud enough to rattle the reinforced glass. That night, I documented her symptoms in my private log, the same way I'd documented the others before her. The progression was always similar, though the speed varied. Beverly was moving faster than most toward whatever waited outside. I lay awake in my quarters, listening to the storm and thinking about the 7 colleagues I'd lost during my time here. Some evacuated, some simply gone. I wondered if Beverly would be number 8, and if Maxwell would survive long enough to see it happen. The knocking started again that night, this time at Beverly's door. But unlike Maxwell, who had put in earplugs and endured it silently, I heard her voice through the wall, speaking softly to whatever waited on the other side. I closed my eyes, knowing what would come next. The rules existed for a reason, written in the blood and sanity of those who came before. Beverly was breaking them one by one, and I wasn't sure I could protect her from what that would bring. I found myself alone in the common room one evening, the last one awake after Maxwell and Addie had turned in early. The television in the corner sat silent, and the only sound was the constant hum of the heating system fighting against the Antarctic cold. I'd been reviewing some research notes, but now the emptiness of the room pressed in around me. Rule 3. Never be the last person awake in common areas. I closed my notebook and stood up, moving to switch off the lights. The first bank of fluorescence went dark with a click, casting half the room into shadow. As I reached for the second switch, the door to the communications room swung open. Beverly Jenkins stumbled in, her eyes unfocused. She stopped when she saw me, blinking rapidly like she was trying to clear her vision. "Dalton?" Her voice sounded rough, uncertain. I thought everyone was asleep. "Just heading to bed," I said, my hand frozen on the light switch. "You okay?" She ran her fingers through her short, natural hair, leaving it more disheveled than before. "I've been hearing things. In the comms room. I didn't turn the lights back on, but I didn't finish turning them off either. The half-lit room felt wrong, like we were caught between states." "What kind of things?" "Voices." Beverly looked over her shoulder toward the communications room. "At first, I thought it was radio interference, but they're saying my name. They know my name, Dalton." I moved away from the light switch and toward Beverly, careful to keep my expression neutral. "Let's get out of the common area. We can talk in the hallway." She nodded, but her eyes drifted back to the comms room door. I gently took her elbow, guiding her toward the dormitory corridor. As we left, I reached back and hit the last light switch, plunging the common room into darkness. Rule 3. "How long have you been hearing these voices?" I asked as we walked down the hallway, the overhead lights humming above us. "A few days, maybe a week." Beverly rubbed her arms like she was cold, though the heating system kept the interior at a constant 68 degrees. "They started during the last storm, just whispers at first, but now they're clearer." We reached the junction where the hallway split toward our separate quarters. I didn't want to leave her alone, not with what she was describing. "Why don't we check in with Addie first? She might have some sleep aids that could help." Beverly shook her head. "I don't need sleep aids. I need to understand what they're saying." "Beverly, they're calling me, Dalton. They need something." I kept my voice steady. "That's exactly why we need to get you some rest. Whatever you're hearing, it's not something you should listen to." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. I am tired." I walked her to her door, waited until she was inside, then headed to my own quarters. I didn't sleep much that night, listening for any movement in the hallway, any sign that Beverly might be getting up again. 3 days later, Addie knocked on my door at 2 a.m, her face pale in the dim hallway light. "I just saw Beverly outside my window," she said without preamble. I blinked sleep from my eyes. "What?" "Beverly." She was standing in the snow looking in at me. Addie pulled her robe tighter around herself. She was wearing her station jacket, the one with the communications patch. I stepped into the hall, closing my door behind me. "When?" "Just now, 5 minutes ago." Addie's voice was steady, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. The storms picked up again. Visibility shouldn't be more than 10 feet, but I could see her clearly. We moved quickly down the corridor to Beverly's quarters. I knocked first, then again harder when there was no response. After the third knock, I used my override code on the keypad. The door slid open to reveal Beverly lying in her bed, apparently asleep. Her breathing was deep and regular, her form under the blankets unmistakable. "Beverly," I called, staying in the doorway. She stirred, then sat up slowly, blinking at us. "What's wrong?" Addie pushed past me into the room. "Were you just outside?" Beverly frowned, her confusion appearing genuine. "Outside? No, I've been asleep. Someone who looked exactly like you was standing outside my window 5 minutes ago," Addie said, "wearing your jacket with the comms patch." Beverly looked down at herself, then at the closet where her outdoor gear hung. "I've been here the whole time. I might have been sleepwalking earlier, but I wouldn't go outside. Not in this storm." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Her eyes met mine steadily, but there was something off about her expression, a blankness that hadn't been there before. "We'll talk more in the morning," I said finally. "Addie, why don't you stay in Maxwell's corridor tonight?" Addie nodded, her eyes not leaving Beverly. "Yeah, good idea." I closed Beverly's door and walked Addie back toward the main junction. When we were out of earshot, she turned to me. "That wasn't a doppelganger like the others, Dalton. It was wearing her specific jacket, the one with the torn pocket she fixed with that red thread. I nodded. I know. Get some sleep if you can. We'll figure this out tomorrow. Morning brought no clarity, only more questions. Beverly joined us for breakfast, looking tired but otherwise normal. She spooned oatmeal into her mouth mechanically while Maxwell and Addie exchanged glances across the table. About last night, I said, setting down my coffee mug. You mentioned sleepwalking. Beverly nodded. I've been doing it since I was a kid. Stress makes it worse. And you think you went outside? I kept my tone casual. I must have. How else would Addie have seen me? Beverly shrugged. I don't remember it, but that's how sleepwalking works. Your boots would be wet, Addie pointed out. It's been snowing all night. Beverly hesitated, then set down her spoon. I'll show you. We followed her back to her quarters where she pointed to her snow boots sitting by the door. They were completely dry, the treads clean of any snow or moisture. That's strange, Beverly said, frowning at the boots. I could have sworn. You couldn't have gone outside without boots, I said. Not in 20 below. Beverly stared at the boots, then looked up at me. Then how did Addie see me? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew what it meant, but Beverly wasn't ready to admit it yet. Maybe I need more sleep, she said finally. I've been working long hours in comms. I'll take your shift today, I offered. You rest. Beverly started to protest, then stopped. Thanks. Maybe that's best. After she closed her door, Addie turned to me in the hallway. She's seeing it, isn't she? The woman in the snow. I nodded. And it's seeing her too. I didn't let Beverly out of my sight after that. I rearranged the duty roster so either Maxwell or I was always with her. When she slept, one of us sat outside her door. When she worked, we found reasons to be in the same room. Maxwell had adapted well to station life. He checked his locks religiously, never lingered in common areas alone, and kept his eyes down during storms. When the knocking came at night, he put in his earplugs and ignored it until morning. He was learning to survive. Beverly was not. Her condition deteriorated rapidly over the next week. She jumped at shadows, pressed her ear to the walls during storms, and stared longingly out windows when she thought no one was watching. Then she started talking about the woman in the snow. She's not what you think, Beverly told me one afternoon as we monitored communications equipment together. She's trying to help us. I kept my eyes on the readouts. Rule 4, Beverly. We don't talk about her. But she's explained it all to me. Beverly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. The voices in the ice, the knocking at night, it's all connected. She says there's something underneath the station, something ancient that was here before us. I turned to face her. When did you look at her face? Beverly blinked, then looked away. I didn't. Beverly. Just for a second. She twisted her hands together. 2 nights ago. She was outside my window and I just wanted to see. You know what happens to people who look at her. Beverly shook her head. That's what I'm trying to tell you. She's beautiful, Dalton, not in a scary way. She understands this place better than we do. I'd heard it all before. Lewis Hicks had said almost the exact same words before we found him 3 miles from base, half frozen and talking to the wind. Evelyn Pierce had spoken of beauty and understanding while clawing at the door locks, desperate to return to the snow. What does she want from you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She wants to show me something. Beverly's eyes had a faraway look. Something important, out on the ice. She says I need to come alone. That night, after Beverly finally fell asleep, I sat at my desk and updated my log. I recorded her symptoms in clinical detail, the fixation on the entity, the rationalization of breaking rules, the increasing desperation to go outside. It was the same progression I documented 7 times before. I noted how she'd started with hearing voices, then progressed to seeing her own doppelganger, before finally making direct contact with the snow woman. The pattern was consistent, though the speed of deterioration varied. Beverly had gone from first symptoms to full obsession in just under 2 weeks, faster than most, but not as fast as Evelyn. I closed the log and rubbed my eyes. The storm outside had picked up again, wind howling against the reinforced walls of the station. In weather like this, no rescue helicopter could reach us, even if I called for evacuation now. All I could do was watch, wait, and try to keep Beverly inside until help could come. I knew from experience that the next phase would be the hardest, when she'd try anything to get outside, to answer the call that had taken hold of her mind. Maxwell knocked softly on my open door, his face grim in the low light. "She's talking in her sleep," he said. "I can hear her through the wall. What's she saying?" "She keeps repeating, 'I'm coming,' over and over." I nodded. "Stay alert tomorrow. Don't let her near the exits." Maxwell hesitated in the doorway. "Will she get better?" "No," I said. "No one ever does." I held Beverly back as she lunged for the door, her body surprisingly strong as she twisted against my grip. The Category 5 blizzard howled just beyond the reinforced steel, winds easily topping 100 miles per hour. Snow pellets machine-gunned the exterior, creating a constant background roar that almost, but not quite, drowned out Beverly's screams. "Let me go!" she yelled, her voice cracking with desperation. "She needs me! She's waiting for me!" "Maxwell!" I shouted over my shoulder, still struggling to maintain my hold on Beverly. Her elbow connected with my ribs, sending a sharp pain through my side. "Get the emergency restraints from the medical cabinet!" Maxwell appeared at the end of the hallway, his face pale but determined. He nodded once and disappeared toward the medical bay. Beverly's nails dug into my forearm as she clawed at me. "You don't understand," she hissed, her eyes wide and unfocused. "She showed me her face. She's beautiful, Dalton. So beautiful. And she's alone out there." "There's nothing out there but death, Beverly," I said, using my weight to push her away from the door. "That storm will kill you in minutes." "No!" The word came out as a wail. "She'll protect me. She told me about what's under the ice, the ancient things. They're waking up, Dalton. They need us to help them." I'd heard similar ravings before, from Louis, from Evelyn, from Jimmy before he went completely catatonic. The words changed, but the desperate conviction never did. Once they looked at the woman's face, they were lost. Maxwell returned with the restraints, thick canvas straps with padded cuffs designed for medical emergencies. We kept them for exactly this situation, though I hated using them. "Hold her steady," Maxwell said, his voice surprisingly calm given the circumstances. Beverly saw the restraints and her struggles intensified. "No, you can't! She's waiting for me!" She kicked out, catching me in the knee. I stumbled, but maintained my grip. "I need you to secure the other exits," I told Maxwell as I wrestled Beverly toward the floor. "Check the emergency hatches, the maintenance access points, everything. She'll try any way out she can find." Maxwell hesitated for just a second, clearly torn between helping me with Beverly and following my instructions. "Go!" I shouted. "I've got her for now." As Maxwell hurried away, I managed to get one of Beverly's arms secured in a restraint. She fought harder, her free hand slapping and clawing at my face. "You're one of them!" she spat, her expression twisting with sudden hatred. "You're keeping us from the truth. She told me about you, about all of you who won't listen." I ignored the accusation, focusing instead on securing her other arm. Once both were restrained, I pulled her away from the exit and toward the interior corridor. The wind outside seemed to rise in pitch, as if responding to Beverly's distress. "She'll find another way to reach me," Beverly said, her voice suddenly calm and certain. "You can't keep her out forever." The abrupt shift in her demeanor was more unsettling than her violent struggling had been. I'd seen this before too, the cycling between rage, pleading, and eerie calm. It was all part of the progression. For the next several hours, Beverly alternated between fighting against the restraints until she was drenched in sweat and falling into exhausted silence. Maxwell returned after securing all potential exits and helped me move her to the medical bay where we could monitor her more effectively. "Is she going to be okay?" Maxwell asked quietly as Beverly lay on the examination table, her eyes open but staring at nothing. I shook my head. No one ever is after they see the woman's face. When Beverly finally fell into what appeared to be sleep, I took the opportunity to radio for emergency evacuation. The communications room felt unnaturally cold, despite the heating system running at full capacity. "Whitmore Base to McMurdo Station," I said into the microphone, keeping my voice low. "We have a Code 7 medical emergency. Request immediate evacuation for one staff member. Over." The response came back broken and staticky. "McMurdo to Whitmore. Acknowledged Code 7. Evacuation impossible until storm system passes. Current projections show clearing in approximately 48 hours. We'll dispatch helicopter immediately following. Over." Acknowledged, McMurdo. We'll maintain until then. Whitmore out. I set the radio down and rubbed my eyes. 2 days. We would have to watch Beverly for 2 more days. I returned to the medical bay where Maxwell sat beside Beverly's bed, his posture tense. She was talking in her sleep, he said without looking up, saying she could hear them scratching under the floor. The evacuation team can't get here until the storm passes, I told him. We need to set up a rotation. One of us needs to be with her at all times. Maxwell nodded. I can take the first shift. Are you sure? He looked up at me. His expression hardened in a way I hadn't seen before. Yes. I understand the rules now. I understand what happens when you break them. I placed my hand briefly on his shoulder. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. If anything changes, anything at all, you call me immediately. The next 48 hours stretched into what felt like weeks. Beverly cycled through periods of unnatural calm and violent outbursts. During one of her quiet phases, she spoke in a voice that didn't sound entirely like her own. The ice has memories, she whispered to Maxwell during his watch. It remembers things from before people, from before time. She's just a messenger. She's trying to prepare us. During my shifts, she mostly stared at me with naked hatred, occasionally testing her restraints or suddenly lunging forward as if to attack. Once, she began screaming that she could see the woman standing behind me, describing in vivid detail how the snow was melting off her hair and clothes. I didn't turn around. I knew better. By the end of the second day, Beverly had fallen into a state of near catatonia, responding to nothing and no one. Her eyes remained open, tracking movement occasionally, but she no longer spoke or struggled. When the radio crackled with news that the storm had cleared and the evacuation helicopter was inbound, I felt the familiar mixture of relief and failure that always accompanied these situations. Another colleague lost, another evacuation, another name to add to my growing list. Helicopter will be here in 20 minutes, I told Maxwell as I entered the medical bay for what would be our final watch shift. He looked up from where he sat beside Beverly's bed. What happens to her now? They'll take her to the medical facility at McMurdo, then back to the mainland. Psychiatric evaluation, treatment. I didn't add what we both knew. That treatment rarely helped. Once they saw the woman's face, something fundamental changed in them. Will she ever come back? Maxwell asked. I shook my head. No one ever does. When we heard the distant thump of helicopter rotors, Maxwell helped me prepare Beverly for transport. She remained unresponsive as we wrapped her in thermal blankets and secured her to a stretcher. Her eyes were open but saw nothing in the room, or perhaps saw things we couldn't. The medical evacuation team worked quickly and efficiently when they arrived, asking few questions beyond the immediate medical necessities. They'd handled enough Antarctic emergency evacuations to recognize the signs of polar psychosis, even if they didn't know the true cause. Maxwell and I followed them outside to the helicopter landing pad. The storm had left behind a landscape transformed. Pristine white snow stretching in all directions under a sky so clear and blue it hurt to look at it. The cold bit through my layers immediately, the temperature well below zero despite the sunshine. The evacuation team loaded Beverly into the helicopter, her face still blank and unresponsive. Just before they closed the door, her head turned slightly, and for a brief moment, her eyes seemed to focus on something in the distance behind us. A small smile touched her lips, the first expression she'd shown in hours. I didn't turn to look at what she might be seeing. The helicopter lifted off in a swirl of disturbed snow, the sound of its engines gradually fading as it became a diminishing speck against the vast Antarctic sky. Beverly was gone, the 8th colleague I'd watched leave this way in 3 years. Maxwell stood beside me, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. That could have been me, he said quietly, if I'd looked at her face when I saw her through the window that day. But you didn't, I replied. You followed the rules. We watched until the helicopter disappeared completely, leaving behind only the endless white landscape and the low moan of wind across the ice. The familiar emptiness settled in my chest. Relief that the immediate crisis had passed, sadness for what had been lost, and the heavy knowledge that it would happen again. It always did. We should get back inside, I said finally. It's too cold to stay out here. Maxwell nodded, but neither of us moved immediately. Something about watching the helicopter vanish made the finality of Beverly's departure sink in. She had arrived 3 months ago, bright, capable, skeptical of the rules, just like everyone was at first. Now she was gone, her mind shattered by whatever waited for us in the Antarctic wilderness. "Does it get easier?" Maxwell asked, his eyes still fixed on the empty horizon. "Watching them leave like this?" "No," I admitted. "It doesn't." We turned and walked back toward the entrance of Whitmore Research Base. The heavy door closed behind us with a metallic thud that echoed through the empty corridors. With Beverly gone, there were only 3 of us left, me, Maxwell, and Addie, until the next replacement arrived. I felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto my shoulders. I would need to update the logs, file the incident report, and prepare for whoever would come to take Beverly's place at the communication station. The cycle would begin again. Maxwell checked the door locks twice before we continued down the hallway, a habit now firmly established. He understood now. He had seen firsthand what happened when the rules were broken. I spent the weeks following Beverly's departure training Maxwell to help orient the next new arrival. The days blended into one another, marked by the same routines, the same vigilance, the same windows that needed checking twice each night. Maxwell took to his new responsibilities with a seriousness I appreciated. He'd seen what happened to Beverly, seen how quickly someone could fall apart, and that knowledge had solidified his commitment to the rules. "So I should tell them about the rules right away?" Maxwell asked one afternoon as we sat in the common room reviewing orientation procedures. "Or wait until they've settled in a bit?" "First day," I said. "Same way I told you. Get them alone in their quarters, sit them down, and lay it out. Don't sugarcoat it." Maxwell nodded, making notes in the small pad he'd taken to carrying. "And if they don't believe me?" "They usually don't at first, but make sure they understand that following the rules keeps them alive, whether they believe in what's out there or not." I had survived 3 years at Whitmore by following the rules absolutely. I'd watched others succumb to curiosity or disbelief, people who thought the protocols were just superstition or the paranoid invention of isolated minds, people who looked when they should have turned away, people who listened when they should have put in earplugs, people who opened doors that should have stayed locked. 7 colleagues lost during my tenure. 7 faces I still remembered clearly. 7 reminders of what waited beyond our protective protocols. Amber Warner had been the first. I remembered her laugh, how it seemed to brighten the common room during those long winter nights. Then she'd gone outside alone during what seemed like perfect weather. Her footprints stopped 30 yards from the base as if she'd simply vanished mid-step. Lewis Hicks came next. He'd been a good man, steady, until he chased the woman in the snow. When we found him 3 miles out, half frozen and babbling about her beautiful face, I knew he was already gone. The evacuation was just a formality. The others followed: Jimmy, Evelyn, and now Beverly. Each one breaking a different rule, each one lost in their own way. "You're thinking about them again," Maxwell said, breaking into my thoughts. I looked up, not realizing I'd gone quiet, just taking stock. As I prepared for another Antarctic winter, I found myself reflecting more often on my role as guardian of institutional knowledge. The official orientation materials from the Research Foundation mentioned nothing about the things we experienced here. Nothing about figures that appeared outside windows during storms. Nothing about darkness that moved independently in corners. Nothing about the woman in the snow or the voices in the ice. The rules weren't arbitrary safety measures dreamed up by bored researchers. They were hard-learned wisdom purchased with human lives. "What about Addie?" Maxwell asked. "She's been here almost as long as you." "Addie knows the rules," I said, "but she focuses on her work, keeps her head down, doesn't like talking about the things we've seen." "But she saw Beverly outside her window that night." "Yes, and she reported it immediately. That's why she's still here." Maxwell had proven himself capable of survival in the weeks since Beverly left. He'd become my ally in protecting future arrivals, understanding now what was at stake. When he'd first arrived, I'd seen the same skepticism I'd once felt myself. Now, I saw the same watchfulness I'd developed. "The replacement for Beverly should arrive next month, weather permitting," I said, checking the calendar on my tablet. "Communications specialist named Thomas Chen. I'll help you get him up to speed," Maxwell said with a nod. The station felt emptier with just the 3 of us. The hallways seemed longer, the nights quieter except when the knocking came. But we managed. We kept the systems running, conducted our research, and most importantly, we stayed vigilant. I understood I might spend years more at Whitmore Research Base. Training newcomers and maintaining the vigilance that kept them alive had become my purpose here. Beyond whatever research goals had originally brought me to Antarctica, I couldn't leave, not when I carried knowledge that others needed to survive. One evening, as Maxwell and I finished dinner in the common room, he asked the question I'd been expecting. "Have you ever thought about requesting a transfer, going back to the mainland?" I considered my answer carefully. Yes. After Amber disappeared, after Louis, after each of them, really. But you stayed. Someone has to be here who knows. Someone has to tell the new arrivals what they're really facing. I pushed my empty plate aside. "Would you have believed any of this if you'd just read it in a manual?" Maxwell shook his head. "No, I'd have thought it was some kind of joke or hazing ritual." "Exactly. The rules need a human voice behind them, someone who's seen what happens when they're broken." The isolation and supernatural threats had changed me over the years. I'd come to Whitmore as an atmospheric researcher, excited about the work we'd be doing. Now I was something else. Part scientist, part guardian, part keeper of dangerous secrets. But I had survived to pass along the knowledge others needed. Each successful orientation meant another life saved. Each person who learned to check their locks twice, to never be the last one awake in common areas, to never follow the woman in the snow, they all had a chance because of what I could teach them. Later that night, I stood at the reinforced window in my quarters, looking out at the endless white. The Antarctic landscape remained beautiful and deadly, hiding forces that defied scientific explanation. The moonlight cast long shadows across the snow, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement, a figure standing just at the edge of visibility. I immediately looked down, away from whatever might be out there. I checked my window locks, once, twice. Then I pulled the heavy blackout curtains closed. I was prepared to maintain my watch for as long as necessary. The woman in the snow would still be waiting tomorrow night, and the night after that. The knocking would continue. The darkness would still gather in corners when left alone too long. But I knew the rules, and now Maxwell did too. And soon, Thomas Chen would learn them as well. That was how we survived at Whitmore. One rule at a time, one night at a time, one winter at a time.